We live in revolutionary times, not just in the Arab world. If we look at the last 20 years, it begins with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the revolutions that changed the face of Eastern Europe, and then the fall of the Soviet Union, followed by the color revolutions all through Central Europe and all through Central Asia. It culminated before it hit the Arab world, it culminates in 2009 in the Green Revolution in Iran, brutally put down by the regime. Last year, it came to the Arab world. There's been a lot of ink written about the Arab world as if Arabs are different or unique, and yet we see that this is a movement that seems to be sweeping around the globe. And may I add, we are not immune to it ourselves. All you have to do is look at the Occupy movements around the United States. But today we're going to talk about the Arab manifestation of this revolutionary movement and what's been the results of this revolution. Well, if you look at Tunisia, a small country on the very, very outskirts of the Arab world, there's actually a chance of a viable democracy developing out of the revolutionary movement that overthrew the autocracy that had been running that country for the previous 50, 60 years. Other than that, however, I believe that the Arab Revolution or the Arab Spring is a total failure, an absolute total failure. If you look at Egypt, you had a group of 30-year-old unemployed computer engineers running a mass movement to try to overthrow the government. Well, the president's gone. That 30-year-old computer engineer, unemployed, is now a 31-year-old unemployed computer engineer. It hasn't changed anything. Who's in charge in Egypt? The Supreme Military Council. The military's been running Egypt since 1952. They're still running Egypt today. If you go around the rest of the Arab world where we look at these revolutionary movements, and I say that plural, there is no Arab revolutionary movement. Each country, it's been slightly different, but with the exception of Tunisia, I have not seen any success. In Libya, what we had was basically a civil war between the power elite of Tripolitania and the power elite of Benghazi. This is a rivalry that goes back hundreds of years. Benghazi won. Why? Because NATO intervened and bombed. And had there not been a NATO intervention, the Tripolitanians would still be running Libya. In Yemen, President Saleh has gotten involved in another civil war. Is this a revolutionary movement? No, it's his vice president that launched a rebellion against him. President Saleh has stepped down. The vice president's taking over. This is not a revolution. In Bahrain, the people rose up in Bahrain saying, oh my, there was success at Tahrir Square in Egypt. How do you define success? I don't know. So we're going to do the same thing at the Pearl Roundabout, brutally suppressed by a Saudi invasion, by invitation of the rulers of the country, brutally suppressed. And so it goes. So it goes. The end result, in Egypt, you have people demonstrating today, a year later, and I'm sure Dr. Hovsepian will tell us about it. Why? Because the goals that they had established a year ago have not been met. In Libya, thanks to our intervention, you now have armed militia groups roaming the streets of Tripoli, lawlessness, a recreation of Beirut. In Bahrain, you have military forces everywhere. In Yemen, you have fighting continuing. It just goes, and in Syria, look at what's happening in Syria. Because NATO has not intervened in Syria yet, and I hope they don't, but the fighting continues. Russia is supporting the Assad regime, and it appears that no matter who wins, the end result is nobody's going to win. Last comment, where does that leave the United States? Well, it doesn't leave us in a particularly good situation. What we had was a stable situation, not a democratic situation, but a stable situation where U.S. interests were slowly being advanced. But in 2010, the president put out his national security strategy, President Obama's national security strategy. And in it, you may ask yourself, why did these movements begin when they began? In the national security strategy, he specifically states it will be the policy of the United States to provide financial support to NGOs and civil society organizations in countries that are not democratic. In other words, all of these movements and organizations, they may not even know it themselves, but they've been receiving aid from the United States government. And the aid of that United States government has ended up in instability throughout the entire region.
Now, in January, I spent the entire month away from Orange County, which is always nice to travel away from Orange County for me, because I'm a New York, feisty New Yorker. And I stopped in Paris, ostensibly to meet with some of the Syrian opposition, particularly the Kurdish leaders of the Syrian opposition, and to speak with my colleagues at the Le Monde Diplomatique, and then on to Beirut to have a chance to speak abstractly about what's happening in the Arab world, and then in Egypt to look at the quotidian level of what's happening on the ground. I think we need to introduce different measures than my colleague Jim Coyle has done. Let's see what of the Arab Spring or awakening, or what I call the rise of a pro-democracy movement, has achieved. First, it was instigated by youth and workers. Workers, in my mind, played the key role in getting people out in the squares, not only of Tahrir, but in Alexandria and all the other cities of Egypt. Two issues influenced them. One, the previous decade, worker strikes, and also solidarity around Palestine. Palestine is alive and well in the minds of the Egyptians who brought down Mubarak. And if we do not contribute to its resolution, rather than see candidates for the presidency question whether Palestinians are real or invented, what the pro-democracy movement has achieved, authoritarian rule has lost its legitimacy forever. That's not a slight achievement. If authoritarians remain in power, they remain in power only because of the power of violence at their disposal, rather than the consent of the public. Fear of fear is over among the publics. The most violence exercised is in the most authoritarian regimes, as in Libya, as in Bahrain, and of course, Syria, the most violent of all. Two countries, Tunisia and Egypt, have emerged a year after the start of their revolutions, started in December of 2010 in Tunisia and succeeded in removing Ben Ali, the dictator, in January. And in Egypt, in 18 days, starting the 25th of January and ending on the 11th of February when Mubarak was forced to step down. It's a lovely day because it also is my late father's birthday. What has been achieved in the elections that both of these countries have produced. One, the political landscape has changed. In the past, you had one of two options: the military or the mosque. All political opposition was either 6 feet under, in exile, or in jails. To be surprised that Islamist political parties have won a majority would mean that somebody is not watching history and reading history. It is expected. I am not surprised by it. And it's time that the US stop its Islamophobia and recognize that Islamic political parties are highly legitimate political parties, and they garnered majorities of their people's vote. In a conversation with my friend Lisa Anderson, whom I've known since she was a doctoral student at Harvard and now is the president of the American University of Cairo, which is the best university in Egypt, she told me, you know, we can use an imprecise analogy that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt can be very well equated with its economic policies to the Republican Party in the United States and the Salafis to the Tea Party. Now, I hope that upsets you. We can talk about it later. The Islamist parties have garnered support because of their charity work over the years. But there is a problem with charity work. They no longer are oppositional forces. They have to deliver state policies, and state policies that address the key demands of the revolutions: freedom, bread, and social justice. Charity will not resolve that, because charity transforms the individual into a dependent. Policy can transform that dependent person into an active agent proposing alternative ideas. So let me say clearly, the elections are historic in nature. And let me focus more on Egypt, by virtue of the time I have spent there, and also it's a country I follow more than the others. On the 25th of January of this year, Egyptians went out either to celebrate or to commemorate. Some did not want to celebrate because there were too many martyrs in the revolution, too many people maimed and killed by the military, who are our allies, mind you. And their families have not been yet dealt with properly. So it is those voices, and they had filled the squares of Egypt. At the end of that night, after I spent 9 hours in the square, Tahrir Square, with my knees rather hurting and my ankles hardly able to walk on them, I posted on my Facebook. Yes, I do have a Facebook account. And it was one of my students who insisted that she go to my office and set up a profile for me. Let me read to you what I posted. After 9 hours in Tahrir, I am back at my hotel. Mind you, hundreds of thousands of poor people who slept on the sidewalks from the night before, brought little baskets of their food, did not have the luxury of going to their hotels. They were going to sleep in the street because they traveled too long. They are the salt of the earth, and they are the ones demanding social justice. Words fail me at the moment to express what I witnessed and what I feel. People from all walks of life marched all over to converge on Tahrir. Tahrir means liberation. The Egyptian state was not there, and no chaos. It is the state that creates the chaos after all. The day was a carnival. Tahrir was shared peacefully by all religious and ideological trends. People want the military out. And those demonstrations will continue until the military is out. And the military is taking small steps back every day. A new politicized people that displays resilience and insists on a post-authoritarian political order. Politics is back. It was killed for 40 years before. Now it is back, right in the square, and the public square, which is what is celebrated in Greek history of the founders of democracy, the agora, the public square, is there. Politics is back. Fear is gone. National pride is abundant. I am emotionally moved. People want to protect their revolution. The central message, legitimacy, emanates from Tahrir, that is, the people. I am very humbled and proud. When Parliament opened, a new experience, an elected Parliament, people were glued to their televisions or radios. The talk of the town, of the city, of the country was politics. Imagine if you walk in Orange County and politics is the central preoccupation of people. I hope that day comes. And they were talking politics in terms of their expectations of the new regime. They have legislative power. They want to control the military. Right now, there are negotiations with the military over at least having transparency to a new committee to be established in Parliament, similar to our intelligence committees in Congress. But the total budget should be clear to those. Should that not happen, America has a role to play. Cut off aid to Egypt until that happens, and military aid in particular. And I would suggest cut off aid to Israel until it is willing to help set up a Palestinian state. Then we advance peace and democracy simultaneously, rather than the sham that we hear from all Democratic and Republican candidates who have zero vision about peace. That's our responsibility in this country. The Parliament then has assumed sovereignty. And the first change in discourse from the revolution in 2011 to the present was the simple slogan, Al-Sha'b yurid, people demand. That's an exquisite reversal of discourse. This is what democracy is all about. Not that leaders tell us what to do. We demand of leaders to do what we expect them to do. That discourse has changed, and it traveled from Tunis to Egypt to the other parts, whether successful or unsuccessful. The discourse has changed. A new vocabulary has taken over in the discourse. The public square has been created. Now, people in Tahrir and elsewhere, they have discovered their voices. Their tongues were tied, and now they are loose. Political parties formed to the tune of 70 parties. Clearly, within 2-3 years, those 70 political parties were coalesced into 5 to 7 political parties. And remnants will stay as NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or organizations interested in specific issues, environment, or X or Y or Z. That is the beginnings of a civil society with a political society answerable to people. It's a process. Americans tend to want things instantaneously. We live in an age where instantaneously you get news from all over the world. History is not made that way. History functions on a different scale. It takes time to achieve a major reversal over the ancien regime. The process has begun. What is the greatest obstacle that remains before Egypt? The first demand of the public is that the military must step down. speaking to various heads of political parties in their negotiations with the military, including people on the left and the center and the right, they report that the military understands that they are visionless. They're unable to resolve Egypt's problems. They're an octogenarian crowd who doesn't understand politics. They want to retain their fiefdom, the political economy of the military, which runs about 20% of Egyptian industry to the tune of about 20% of its GDP, right? And that is non-transparent. They will have to give that up, slowly, not immediately. They have to go back to the barracks. They understand that. But the transition will be slow. Publicly, they state that they will return to the barracks after the presidential elections that take place in June. I see no reason why they will not be able to do that. How much of their wings will be clipped by then remains unknown to all of us. All right? So that's one. Two, the central message of the Egyptian revolution, as well as the others throughout the Arab world, was the question of social justice or injustice. If you travel through Cairo, let's limit ourselves to Cairo. A city, when I was growing up, was 2 to 3 million. Today, it's 20 million. It's a huge megapolis. You go to a neighborhood of Sayyida Zainab, where you see the lower middle class hovering over small territory above one another. Or you go to the Ashwa'iyat, which are the slums, where people live in the midst of open sewers. And then you take a car and travel towards the American University of Cairo, which is built in the new Cairo, a new city that is expected by 2020 to have a population of 2.5 to 3 million people. Immediately, the roads widen. Villas adorn the landscape, but ugly villas, right? Horrible architecture. That's another topic, right? There are two parallel lines that do not meet in Egyptian society: the extreme wealth and the extreme poverty. Somewhere in the order of 40% of the Egyptian public lives on or near the $2 mark, which is the formal definition of poverty by the World Bank and the UN and the United Nations Development Bank. So the political economy of social justice, transformed into state policy, will be the challenge of all the political parties involved in the process. The previous regime, from Sadat to the present, bargained for a neoliberal bargain. That paradigm still prevails in state policy. The neoliberal paradigm punishes the poor and rewards the rich. I'm not talking about the US, but I might as well be. That paradigm needs to shift. And if that paradigm does not shift, the social justice question will not be resolved and more turbulence will take place. We have a great opportunity. The world has changed. I disagree with my colleague Coyle. I think the changes are substantial. What he talked about are details that need to be negotiated over a longer period of time. Revolutions are not just a one-day affair. The day the revolution succeeded, the counter-revolution started. So you have a tug of war between various social forces in Egypt, in Tunisia, etc. The political forces, including the Islamic forces, have to confront that challenge. And the Islamic forces today are the ascendant ones. In a 4-year period, they will be asked the question that we ask of our candidates: how did you perform? That is a hopeful sign. The people want. That's the signal of the revolution. Thank you.